If you're standing in front of a wall of blank space and thinking, I need a TV that actually lives up to the hype, not just a pile of specs, you're not alone. Most of us want something that just works bright enough for a sunny living room, smooth enough for gaming, and smart enough that you don't have to wrestle with endless menus. You also don't want to drop a chunk of cash on a screen that looks gorgeous on paper but becomes a headache when the kids start watching cartoons, the family gathers for movie night, or you finally plug in a PlayStation 5. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In this review I'll walk through the everyday experience of owning the Sony BRAVIA 585-inch mini LED TV, highlight who will really benefit, and point out the trade-offs that can turn a great purchase into a regret. First off, the most common hesitation I hear from shoppers is, will this 85-inch be too big for my space, or too bright for my evenings? That's a valid worry because size and brightness aren't just numbers, they change how you interact with the room. The 85-inch model feels like a home theater centerpiece. In a modestly sized living room, say 12-15 feet, the screen dominates the wall but doesn't overwhelm if you sit about 10 feet back. The mini LED backlight, which Sony markets as delivering higher peak brightness and deeper contrast, actually matters in this setup. In a sunlit corner, the TV punches through the glare and still shows detail in bright highlights. At night, the same panel can dim down to a comfortable level without washing out the image, thanks to the local dimming zones that the mini LED array provides. For anyone who watches both daytime news and late-night streaming, that flexibility is a real win. Now, what about the picture quality beyond the hype? The XR processor with AI upscaling does a decent job of pulling out texture from lower-resolution content, but the biggest difference shows up when you're watching HDR movies that support Dolby Vision. Those scenes, think of a dark forest with shafts of light, display a richer color palette that feels more cinematic than the typical SDR content you get on most streaming services. If you're a cinephile who values accurate colors, the billions of real-world colors claim isn't just marketing fluff, it translates into a more immersive viewing experience. However, if your primary use is YouTube videos or standard cable, you won't notice the difference as much, and the AI upscaling can sometimes add a hint of oversharpening that looks unnatural on slower-moving content. Gaming is another arena where this TV tries to shine. Sony designed a PlayStation 5 mode that prioritizes low input lag and makes use of the 120 Hz refresh rate. In practice, the TV feels snappy enough for most titles, and the HDR support adds a nice splash of vibrancy to fast-moving games like Ratchet & Clank, Rift Apart. The only catch is that to actually hit 120 Hz you need to use an HDMI 2.1 cable and enable the appropriate setting in the console's video options, otherwise you'll fall back to 60 Hz, which most casual gamers won't notice. If you're a competitive player who depends on frame-by-frame precision, you might still prefer a dedicated gaming monitor with an even lower input lag, but for the average console gamer the TV delivers a solid balance of size, image quality, and responsiveness. Let's talk about the smart side of things. The BRAVIA 5 runs Google TV, which basically means you have a single home screen that aggregates apps from Netflix, Disney+, Amazon Prime, and a handful of niche services. The voice remote works with Google Assistant, so you can ask for the next episode of Stranger Things without fumbling around the menu. The integration is smooth, but it's worth noting that the system can feel a bit sluggish when you first boot it up after a firmware update. Apps sometimes take a few extra seconds to load. If you're used to the lightning-fast interface of Apple TV or the lean, predictable layout of Roku, you might find the Google TV experience a little heavier on the processor. Still, for most households that want a catch-all solution without buying an extra streaming stick, it's a convenient all-in-one. One practical advantage that doesn't get shouted in the spec sheet is the built-in speaker setup. Most flat-panel TVs rely on thin acoustic panels that can sound tinny, but Sony has tuned the audio for dialogue clarity. While it's not a replacement for a soundbar, you'll notice that movies with complex soundtracks like action films with layered explosions still sound clear enough to enjoy without turning the volume up to uncomfortable levels. The downside is that you'll still need a separate audio solution if you want true surround sound, the Dolby Atmos support is only a signal pass-through, meaning the TV can't produce the full spatial experience on its own. Who should consider buying this TV? If you're a family that watches a mix of streaming services, occasional HDR movies, and plays console games on a PS5, the 85-inch mini LED model gives you a premium picture without the price tag of a